When asked about the ambiguous ending of Twin Peaks The Return, director David Lynch responded that, "For me, it is very precious that everyone has their own feeling, their own dream about what happened. There is nothing more beautiful than mystery. I think you make people unhappy by solving all the mysteries. One mystery solved, you forget it and move on to the next one. An unsolved mystery is frustrating, but it's like a gift." I'm drawn to weird, stylish, and challenging mysteries like the one Lynch describes, whether it's his own Twin Peaks or works inspired by them like Signalis or Alan Wake 2. They're often bursting with creative lore and intricate plots that encourage you to play detective in order to understand them. But too often, I've found that these experiences do all the work to get you invested and then start to leave the stage, so to speak, just as it's getting good, as if they're afraid of being pinned down and losing the power of their burning questions once answered. Now, this phenomenon often results in intentionally disjointed timelines or abstract shots that seem full of implication but perhaps unclear as to what they're trying to draw your eye to. An incredibly useful example of just such a struggle between the best and worst aspects of the mystery stories that Lynch describes is Variable State's first ever game called Virginia, released back in 2016. Virginia is a 1 to 2 hour first-person mystery game with no dialogue. Its storytelling relying on cinematography, animations, and a BAFTA-winning soundtrack composed by Lyndon Holland and performed by the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra at the famous Smecky Studio, where David Lynch's Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive movies were scored. Now, this turns out to be both a fantastically innovative artistic choice, but also kind of a minefield logistically speaking, because I struggled to make sense of this mute story without a lot of speculation from internet forums. And that's fairly important, as Virginia is all about the narrative. We play as new FBI agent Ann Tarver in what is mostly a point-and-click adventure with walking sim sections. The game requires probably the least amount of dexterity of almost any game you'll ever play, stretching the waistband on the definition of game quite a bit. Now, I'm no gatekeeping purist in regards to what makes a game, as I like and respect quite a few walking sims, as you'll come to see on this channel, but Virginia is essentially a montage or a music video of sorts. It's not bad per se, but it's definitely a style indebted to the pace and framing of film to a fault. Now, to be fair, Virginia is very upfront about what it is. The three-person team of directors Jonathan Burrows and Terry Kinney co-wrote the script with composer Lyndon Holland, and sought to evoke the charm of 90s TV shows like Twin Peaks and The X-Files that were popular during the time of the game's setting. Holland even channels the Twin Peaks theme in a bar scene, for instance. So these inspirations inform the story's subject matter and vibe, but the gameplay, or what passes for it, is credited to Blindo Games' 2012 indie offering called 30 Flights of Loving. Despite only taking about 15 minutes or so to finish, 30 Flights is a pretty tough story to crack, and intentionally so. Its whimsical soundtrack doing the heavy lifting as it jump cut chunks you from one character's perspective to another's, often mid-animation. These cinematic elements, combined with the mysticism of Twin Peaks-style dreams, wild animal sightings in strange places like Anne's bedroom, and more, and you've got quite the challenging set of inspirations that Variable State is hoping to pay homage to and use to tell their own intricate tale in Virginia. I'd call Lyndon Holland's award-winning soundtrack the lifeblood of this tale. Sure, the animations and the subtle facial expressions do work, but there's a sturdiness and a sweeping nature to the music, and the editing seems to respond to each note. As such, the gameplay can often feel like an unwanted intruder on the flow that the picture and music have established. This means that the game feels like it's begrudgingly pausing a movie to let you participate, making you look around for something to click on and shake loose the next story beat like you're fixing a jammed slide projector. And sometimes even those sections have you just sitting or staring at something so long you'll think the game is bugged out. Whenever the pacing changes from the normal brisk montage pace, the game never feels quite right. But when it keeps you there and keeps you feeling like you're part of the story and not a hindrance, Variable State plays some cool rhythmic tricks by suckering you into engaging with control, only to find you've basically been setting up the camera for an image bleed or a jump cut. Now, sometimes you'll pick up a piece of evidence like a receipt and the scene will bleed into a similar image that starts a new scene, a classic film trick. But jump cuts are not something I've ever seen in games, and it provides a really cool feeling of the mind remembering events in a cursory way, cutting through all the unnecessary downtime, like this section where you're heading down to the basement of the FBI station, and you jump cut between the stairs to the hall and then to your partner's office door. And speaking of your partner, now is as good a time as any to stop talking vibes and get into the story proper, which is the meat of Virginia. Our story opens with a brief scene of a married man locking a small red box in a closet before it cuts to black. Weirdly enough, as I write this, I'm just now remembering this extremely brief bit and how it comes up again at the very end of the game, so hold on to this as best you can. We then cut to our protagonist, Anne Tarver, as she looks in the bathroom mirror. Much like Zoolander, Anne seems to wonder,
"Who am I?"
Jokes aside, this central image is what she'll be asking herself throughout the whole story. She puts on the mask that is her lipstick and gets in line to be sworn into the FBI as the crowd cheers her on. Then we get a surreal moment where the crowd disappears and the stage is bathed in red light. Then we hear what sounds like a life support machine, but the sound is coming from a recorder before we enter a dream sequence where Anne wakes up. Anne gets up, eyes herself in front of the mirror, and goes into the hall before the scene does its first obvious jump cut to Anne at the bureau. We receive our first assignment, which is an unpleasant one. Keep tabs on a supposedly loose cannon and our new partner, Maria Halperin. Now, having just replayed the game the day I'm writing this script, this hits me a little harder than normal. So, I've worked at a cemetery this past year, and risen up to 4th in command pretty fast, much to the chagrin of my many fairly lazy and entitled coworkers. No matter how much I do for them without asking for the slightest thing in return, I'm always going to be the uppity white boy snitch to them if I don't let them slack off or actually ask them to do our job and stop watching their coworkers pick up the slack. So, when Anne, a black woman, is given explicit directives to be a snitch on another woman of color by a white director, it seems to be an obvious sociological statement by the developers, and it's also an interesting reversal of my own situation that makes this story come alive in some uncomfortable ways, which we'll get more into later. But back to the story, in between Anne keeping tabs on Maria, the two begin their first case together, a missing persons case about a boy named Lucas Fairfax, the son of a priest and his wife. Now things get weird pretty quickly as, while Maria comforts the parents in the living room, Anne finds a dark room hidden in Lucas's closet. Now, don't ask me how a likely 12-year-old or so not only found a way to create a secret room in his closet, but also managed to put together a functioning dark room. Now, if that wasn't weird enough, the pictures inside are even more telling. We see the sheriff from the living room that we'll come to know as Taft, a water tower, and more. As Maria and Anne leave the scene on a back road, they screech to a halt as they almost hit a buffalo that's wandered across the road. They pull over shortly afterwards to get gas, and while Anne waits in the car, she rifles through the glove box and finds mail with the same address but two different names, Maria Halperin and Maria Ortega, suggesting that Maria changed her name. Not only that, but Anne also knows where her new partner lives. But before she can dwell on this too much, some punk kids drive up and flip her off before speeding away. The next day, Anne's flipping through Lucas's journal she found in his darkroom and finds drawings of UFOs at a cave and a Cannon Observatory pamphlet. Then we're back at the Fairfax's house, taking time to notice that the sheriff in Lucas's photos is here. What's that about? Now we stroll past Lucas's room with his father angrily boarding it up, and then we surreally make our way through a glowing door into a series of visions. One where we're driving with Director McCarran and hitting Maria, and another where a buffalo is in our room. Twin Peaks is officially in the house. We're then in Maria's office and open her locket to see a short-haired woman. Maria's none too happy we're snooping as this locket seems to dredge up some bad memories, but the two of you are soon off to a cave you saw in Lucas's drawing, which overlooks a water tower and a drainage ditch. Inside we see chairs, a record player, and even a boarded-up area with bird cages in it, one of which even has a little cardinal inside. We soon cut to a weird sequence where we go down to a morgue to see the cardinal resting on a table, but as we near it, it flies away. Then we're back at the cave again, this time roped off with caution tape. Oh look, it's two kids smoking. And when you know it, it's the boy who flipped you off earlier. True to form, this little dickhead shoves an FBI agent because he's too dumb to know this could ruin his life, and you and Maria subdue the little shit, but not before he tears off Maria's locket and chunks it over the fence and down to the drainage ditch. We frisk the dude, and then we're back at the station, rifling through his belongings. A knife and a wallet, empty of everything but what we find out later is drug paraphernalia, specifically some LSD. We put this shit in a red envelope, much like the red of the door we went through earlier and the cardinal itself, though what this means is anyone's guess. Is the red symbolizing guilt of hiding something? Remember, the cardinal was boarded up, the red door seems to switch scenes because we can't seem to see what's behind it yet, and the envelope is hiding evidence we just stole. Well, speaking of guilt, we soon have an ominous vision of a blazing furnace on the back road we keep driving, the pathway littered with Lucas's missing persons posters. Inside the furnace is a cardinal that slips away. Starting to feel more and more like guilt to me. Back at the office, we return to our collecting info on Maria, noting that the files for Maria Halperin and Maria Ortega are now joined in the system, and we note that Maria Ortega is related to Judith Ortega. Some old-school microfishing reveals that Judith was a star agent and was recognized for her accomplishments as a woman of color. We also notably get a very how do you do, fellow kids kind of progressivism from the article, noting how inspirational she is as a wife and a mother, as well as being a great FBI agent from a batch of lady agents. But we then change gears from this naive ass-kissing to what has to be the developer's message. Her husband notes that he sees his moral influence in her achievements. Oh, you guys, gotta take the credit for everything in this man's world, am I right? Gotta say, this sounds a little contrived to be condescending and demeaning to her accomplishments, and it's where the game first tips its hand at saying something. But aside from this try-hard progressivism, we get another slide that shows us that her methods are called into question, breaching codes of ethics and apparently taking drugs, and she's recommended for suspension without pay as a result. Well, now we know why Maria is so protective of her locket. Is her likely mother Judith the victim of being framed, or a cover-up, or what? It's hard to say. We then cut to a diner scene where a political candidate gives us a campaign badge. Then we look down at a Dominion construction pamphlet, but I couldn't tell you where we got this from in the story, or why we somehow wind up at the observatory instead. Well, anyway, inside this observatory is where things get spicy. So Maria and Anne are inspecting the area, right? And as they're inspecting the top floor, who should stumble upon this quiet scene but the red-haired priest, Lucas's father, who's having an altercation with that young girl we saw smoking with the other kid who flipped us off and assaulted us. What is going on here? Anne and Maria immediately show up at the doorstep of old Father Fuckaround to see what they can find out. Getting no answer, we very illegally lockpick and enter the home of these fairly odd parents. Anne rifles through Father Fuckaround's desk and opens a file, but we get one of the game's patented linger for so long you think the game locked up shots before we cut to a bar scene? It's all very Twin Peaks The Roadhouse, down to the song and everything. Maria takes off, or somehow has a wedding ring on her person that she gives us, and we use it to stave off a lusty fellow who wants to chat us up. Okay. We drink up and later find ourselves still drinking atop a water tower with Maria, where we decide that we are bestest homies now. The next day, we awake in Maria's house. Snooping around, we find what is likely her mother Judith's room full of women's activism posters, and then we also find an empty hospital bed, and evidence downstairs of how the bathroom was fitted to accommodate a person who had trouble getting around or was handicapped. There's also a very locked door upstairs, so something precious must be behind this door. Maria's downstairs making us breakfast like any new best friend would, and we see a little deeper into her world now. Did her mother Judith, a firecracker activist for women's rights and a crack FBI agent, possibly get sick and maybe die from her drug use, or perhaps the strain of being discredited? We'll have to wait soon to find out, or maybe not find out. We soon find ourselves in a dark room where we develop some snapshots we found in Lucas's dark room, and find one of a chain statue and one of Father Fuckaround hugging up on that young girl we saw earlier. We cut to said father in handcuffs, but we have to let him go, apparently because we couldn't find any connection between Lucas's disappearance and his father's indiscretion. As you can imagine, the wife's not happy with him. But look, that sus Sheriff Taft from earlier claps the priest's shoulders reassuringly because of the boys club, am I right? Actually, there's more to it than that, but we'll find out more about that later. Maria even shakes her head that she got nothing out of the young girl caught in the affair. So there's no connection and no foul play to be found here. Another dead end. But what we do find is a renewed sense of urgency to check out all leads remaining. And that just so happens to be that chained statue picture from earlier, which we now realize is from the Cannon Observatory. We are roused from looking at our reports on Maria by the woman herself entering the car with some lunch, but her look says she suspects something's up. Our stakeout shows us the military trucks driving up on the observatory. We drive up to investigate, but are denied entry by that politician we bumped into earlier in the diner. Sus. We cut to the gas station again, this time Maria's giving us a stuffed buffalo. A stuffalo? But in our haste to acquire the stuffalo, we drop our informant files on the ground, revealing our treachery to Maria. She understandably storms off in the car, leaving our sorry ass behind. We then enter a dream sequence of sorts as we see Anne struggling with delusions of grandeur, being clapped for as she walks across the stage, or receiving her marching orders from a cabal of bad old white men like the Sheriff Taft we keep seeing close to the Fairfax investigation, our boss McCoran, Father Fuckaround, the politician, and the white-haired general we've seen around the bureau throughout the game. This section ends with a buffalo approaching us at the gas station as a cardinal slips in between our fingers. Now, if the cardinal is guilt, like being caught red-handed, I'm curious what the buffalo represents. Friendship? Reconciliation? Doing the right thing? We almost hit him earlier in the road in a dream sequence while driving with Maria, so perhaps it indicates that he's the possibility of our friendship, and we are close to ruining it, even now as it approaches us as we wrestle with our cardinal sins. Then we're back at the cave and decide to go down to Funky Town, i.e. the drain, to see if we can find Maria's locket for her. We survive an impossible fall because video games, but we do end up finding it. Then we hit one of the best sequences in the game. The music really pushes us forward with a sense of urgency as we start to act on our slightly dream-influenced detective skills, feeling much like Dale Cooper. We rush back to Maria's pad and find out that it's actually Judas according to the door tag. We break in using the lock jimmy that Maria gave us earlier when we super illegally broke into the Fairfaxes, so there's some irony there, and we pop open that secret room unlocked upstairs for ourselves. What's that chick hiding? Radios? Receivers? Like a lot of them. And on the wall, a picture of an older, presumably black gentleman and a bunch of FBI files. Guess we got something nice to show the boss, huh? Then we weirdly start fingering our ring finger, almost like we missed the wedding ring that Maria gave us at the bar. I assume this is a commentary on how women supposedly struggle to have a promising career and a family at the same time, but it's a little subtle here. Now, while the previous scene indicated that we were thinking of submitting what we found to the director, we then see Anne and Maria atop the water tower again, and Anne tosses Maria's file out into the wind, which is super irresponsible to do with classified information. But hey, we mean well, and Maria gets the picture. We are going to be BBFS, or best buffalo friends, forever. The funniest part of this scene, though, is when we make this gesture, Maria decides, hey, I guess I should return the favor, and she returns our red envelope which we put the stolen drug evidence in from earlier. How in the world did she wind up with that? I guess she stole it from us somehow, meaning she must have broken into our house too and taken it off our bedside table. Oh, the irony. Oh, we some characters, I tell you. Then, we hit the final day of the game's narrative, and have a vision of our boss tossing our badge at us in disgust while we hold the head of a broken key to our chest. We're roused by Sheriff Taft knocking on our front door, and he's come to arrest us for some reason. We see the cobble of old white dudes walk away from our cell like, "Gotcha, bitch!" And we are left to ponder what the hell has happened. This is where the game starts to lose me. What could the two of you have possibly done to be framed, much less suspected of anything? I mean, we didn't do anything but get rebuffed when visiting the observatory, and we clearly don't have any evidence or even an idea of a conspiracy or anything that these guys seem to really be rallying behind. So this doesn't make any sense except symbolically. Then, one day we get out of jail for some reason, and it looks like it was because we are ratting Maria out. We tell all, McCoran eats it up, and we see a whirlwind montage of us doing the same thing over and over for different agents. Then we rise up the ladder, leaving a pile of ratted out fellow agents in our wake before we end up being the director and telling other agents to do the same thing we used to do. Anne seems to scream in the mirror. Subtle. Okay, fair enough. This is a morally interesting proposition, I'll grant you. Like I said earlier, I recently got promoted to the fourth in command at my cemetery job, and a lot of my man-child 50-year-old coworkers are always complaining that I'm a snitch, which is basically code for I'm annoyed I can't just watch my coworkers do all the work or constantly disobey the managers and do what I want. Now I get this shit all the time. It's like an idle default when nothing's happening to presume they are watching me or they're out to get me. I one time was taking pictures with my phone of some soil erosion near a grave hundreds of feet away in the opposite direction of a coworker who was mowing grass, and he went and called a meeting with my superiors to complain that I was taking pictures of him and sending them to our boss to somehow write him out. For what? God only knows. Doing his job for once? Whatever. So this scene hit me a lot harder than it did the first time I played this game. You know, it's hard to outwork your colleagues and have them constantly talk shit behind your back and pretend you only got here because you're a suck-up when they can't just abide giving up control of their life long enough to do what they get paid to do. It's lonely at the top, I guess. People are naturally jealous of anyone who's doing better than them. And in the case of Ann Tarver, an actual snitch, it's lonely when you climb up the backs of others to get to the top. What I don't get is what she's actually snitching about. Judith did drugs and seemed to just get maligned for her methods, but we never know what she's investigating or whether she was pushed out unfairly and where the drugs even come in the first place. Is it just an addiction she had? Was it part of undercover work? I mean, maybe she was just a fucking nut. Who's to say? The game keeps pushing this black versus white and man versus woman thing, but assumes that this conflict tells its own story, as if because racism and sexism exist, therefore we all know what side we're going to be on if we just mention the topic. But these things alone don't drive stories, and Virginia doesn't do a good job of illustrating how this is happening, just a vague implication that it is. And you know that's bad, so feel bad about it. Great storytelling, very well. Now we can say that it's likely that a group of dudes who rally around a priest who cheats on his wife aren't good folks, right? But that doesn't then become license to justify any charge against them as valid. Stories have to show, not assume, based on sociological shorthand. All that to say, apparently this whole section where we climb the corporate ladder and break through the glass ceiling was just a vision, as we are now back in our cell again as if nothing happened. We give Maria her locket back and take what supplemental material says is LSD, and we start tripping balls. Now let's not forget that an FBI agent being jailed would have been frisked and relieved of the substance already, especially when she's been targeted by some very powerful people supposedly covering up something big. But I digress. Soon, by the power of psychedelics, we exit our cell through an elevator that appears on the wall and journey back to the cave where a glowing ball of light guides us past a huge statue face, probably the chained one, and down to a red door like we keep seeing in our previous visions. Oh god, I hope it's not leading us into another awful Insidious movie! But thank God, it's just a cult sacrifice. Oh, much better. We see the bad white men again at the end of a long corridor of roped people standing over a buffalo they're about to cut open like some meanies, which I guess symbolizes our friendship with Maria or doing the right thing of bringing the truth to light. Then we cut to one of the weirdest things in the game, where we sort of remote view Sheriff Taft as he tries to make a model ship, and we break it, he freaks out, knocks it over, and collapses onto the desk like a big old baby. I don't know what happened here, especially considering he just got rid of us, but okay, sure. Another mystery, and one that doesn't even begin to offer up a shred of guidance as to what it's about. The weirdness continues when we see the politician taking sad photo booth shots. We see a lady named Susan give us coffee at the diner like normal, and then we see a strange interaction where a military officer comes into the diner and almost assaults the general that we keep seeing as well. What? Oh, and check out his name tag. It's a real last name pronounced similar to how Arnold Schwarzenegger's name is, Emenegger, and it's a last name shared with a Robert Emenegger, who was asked by either the military or some politicians back in the day to make a UFO documentary in 1974 cataloging supposed UFO sightings. Even Rod Serling of Twilight Zone fame notably contributed to this film, but it's fairly well criticized as being loosely factual at best. But this weird allusion to UFOs is very important for how the game ends, and is a subtle little clue in here worth giving the devs credit for, as it's one of the ones that actually pays off. Then we see a series of visions, one of which shows Lucas taking pictures of the priest and the young girl while they're having a fling, giving me some reason to believe that Lucas was done in by his father to cover up his indiscretion, because as we know, no priest in entertainment has ever been anything but a huge hypocrite. Rainn Wilson was right. But we then cut to an image of a bedridden older man, and we hear that same sound we heard at the game's beginning on the recorder when the stage went silent. The sound of a life support machine. We show this guy our FBI badge, and he seems proud of Anne, and then he charges us with going into a closet with the whole key we keep seeing Anne hold the broken end of. And lo and behold, we open the red door we keep seeing and see that red lockbox from the intro, which must mean the pair of hands belong to Anne's father, where he first put whatever incriminating evidence is in there. Perhaps he too was an FBI informant on his colleagues back in the day, and is tasking Anne with either getting rid of this evidence or bring it to light. Whichever, Anne ends up burning it in the furnace we've seen in our vision, meaning that she may have gone against her father's wishes to keep her new FBI career from complications. We cut back to the crazy masked ritual again and realize this ritual is taking place in the observatory, either literally or figuratively, as that would be a place symbolizing Big Brother watchfulness. It's also implied by the Emenegger name from earlier and the next shot of a UFO coming down to snatch up Lucas that they were hiding some top secret UFO stuff too. Are we so high that we're spiraling into paranoia? Or is there some truth to this vision? And who is this woman coming out of the flying saucer, and why does she look so normal, not like a little gray man? No telling. The scene goes back to normal, and we see a Lucas-like shadow running away from the scene. Perhaps what really happened, perhaps another drug-addled imagination. Then we're back at the diner one last time, and this time, Maria picks up the check for once. And as we drive away, we see an older boy who looks a lot like Lucas walking with a guitar case. Didn't we see a guitar in his little darkroom? Was he okay all along and not taken up by UFOs?
The world may never know.
So let's try our best to suss this out. The internet's mostly assumed that the old bedridden man is Anne's father, and he was likely caught up in the conspiracy that unseated Judith. That means that the pair of hands we saw locking in the box at the very beginning of the game was him years ago when he covered something up. The idea that this is connected to Judith is completely headcanon, though. It's just attempting to provide some type of grand arc to tie all the story elements together, but the game never admits to any specifics of what these files contain or what they're making our characters do. But if we're playing along with the best interpretation I've seen so far, it looks like we betrayed our dad's last wish, covered up corruption, and feel guilty now that we found this picture of, likely our dad, in Maria's locked room. Again, this is also a likely but circumstantial reading, as the photo's in black and white, but which also makes it hard to suss out whether he's indeed the man at the bed at the end of the game. Variable state, you big pests. But if it is him, this would explain why after finding these, we are content to just let it all go, realizing it should have been over and done with had we not covered up the evidence in the first place. Now, as I'm writing this sounds pretty decent as closure to the story and as a character arc where redemption is found through great tribulation, and Anne becomes a better person for it. The broken key that opened up the evidence lockbox has been in Anne's possession the whole game, but once we've come to terms with what we've done and decided to do better, she leaves the key behind in the diner and moves on with her life. But there's still some persistent things I don't like. This is all headcanon for one. Nothing in-game gives us a direct reason to believe any of this. We don't have almost any impartial specifics as to what Judith was ever taken down for, and we certainly don't know what the FBI is digging up on agent after agent. At first you might assume it's just racism, which would be kind of lazy writing, but that's not even held up as the only reason why people are gotten rid of by the FBI, as we start informing on 2 white guys at the end of that Sell Your Soul vision. And there are just a lot of weird things that happen too, like Anne taking drugs from evidence for herself for later is super random, and I don't see any reason why you would do this illegal thing for seemingly no character reason. Certainly never seen her indicate she uses drugs this way or needs to. Maria breaks into the Fairfaxes because she doesn't have a warrant, which invalidates anything they'd find in a court of law. This also smacks of being contrived as a way to give Anne the lockpicker for when she breaks into Maria's apartment later. And somehow being allowed into her jail cell with narcotics is pretty goofy. And the ending where despite the bad guys seeming to get away with whatever they're doing, they start feeling guilty and distraught, and it just feels like there's a whole scene missing where they got found out after all. Then UFOs of all things come in at the very end to artificially complicate an already vague ending. It really feels like the last section of this game just leans into the cool genre tropes of its favorite properties without much care for why it will matter to the player. It all feels so stamped with the, you figure it out. And that's where I break from this and stories like it. I mean, I respect David Lynch's talents, but you have to admit he's fairly indulgent from time to time.
Nobody's perfect. Isn't that the truth?
And the Lynch-inspired Virginia falls prey to the same problem. Making the mystery so inscrutable and requiring projection to make sense of it isn't inherently engaging or masterful. And at its worst, intentional elusiveness that tries to trick the audience into assuming depth because of a lack of immediate comprehension is disingenuous and, dare I say, arrogant. Like Lynch said, an unsolved mystery is frustrating, but it's like a gift. But taken to a withholding extreme and lacking enough detail to come into any useful focus, it becomes cursed to wander around in our minds with no meaningful guidance and very little to think on other than the sensory experience. Now, not all art has to be didactic or predictably concrete, but the problem is when the abstract story implies heavy details like the contents of the FBI files, and those are the ones moving characters around, we do need to know specifics and can't just rely on projection. If anything, when there aren't multiple endings to consider and you just crash a random X-Files plot point into your procedural crime drama that likes to mimic Dale Cooper's dreams, you get an homage blender and not a coherent story with closure that means something. Also strange is the undercurrent of left-leaning politics that sort of peeps out but doesn't have much of anything to say. Is it just the developer's preference to sort of pepper in their preferences here and there and leave it at that? Maybe. I mean, I'm speaking of the women's rights posters, how the Judith Ortega newspaper clipping seems gobsmacked that she's a successful mother and agent and is part of a new initiative of lady agents as if they're a kind of novelty the FBI is trying out. Then her husband takes credit for her success, which seems a little unlikely to be included in a newspaper report anyway, not to mention it sounds as eye-rolling and stereotypical as, you should smile more or something like that you always see in a movie. Let's also not forget our 2 main characters are women being put down by a cabal of specifically older white men at all levels of power. It's important to note the homogeneity of this cult, or the old boys club they represent, because Virginia doesn't always try to make an unrelenting progressive point. When Anne is seeing a vision of herself rising to the top by being an informant, the developers are careful to have her inform on a man in a turban, then a black guy, then perhaps another non-white ethnic man here, before showing her final 2 targets are 2 white men. So if the game was really trying to drive home the point that she's a traitor to the minority class that she's supposedly a part of, you'd think it'd be more direct and only show non-white people getting wrecked by her selfish campaign. Which leads me to wonder what the game really wants to say here, if anything. The plot seems a little too intentional in its imagery to not be saying something, but it pulls up short or doesn't commit, retreating into the bushes like Homer Simpson. Virginia's mood and sensory momentum are to be praised, as the BAFTA committee already has, no doubt, and I look forward to playing Variable State's second game, Last Stop, to see how they've improved. But the gameplay in this one is so perfunctory and rigidly indebted to the story, I almost wonder if it needed to be even less interactive to not mess up its pacing. Virginia can put you in a magical place at times, but sometimes its unwillingness to commit to the details undermines its emotional impact because it's not clear enough or logical enough to know what happened, and so we can't in turn know beyond sensory perception what we're supposed to take away from it. It seems to me that deconstructive postmodernism in art only has value if it's unharnessing ourselves from the predictable confines of three-act structures and allowing the character studies to come forward. But if you do this at the expense of the logic of the plot that's driving your story forward, there has to be a reason for the dissonance, something revelatory about the intentional lack of congruity. If our unsolved mysteries are to be gifts, as Lynch says, they're going to need to hold themselves up to higher standards and not just get off on being withholding, or worse, intentionally unsolvable. You've often heard it said that art is subjective, but what we should be saying is that audiences' perception of art is subjective and only to a point. All art has something to say, is pushing something, and because all of art's creators have biases, intentionality, and discernment, all artists have made a decision that what they're showing you is worth seeing for a reason, is revelatory or expository in some way. Virginia broaches interesting emotional areas of paranoia, trust, and power dynamics, and has some fun with form, but it's often so non-committal and withholding about its details that we can't fully connect to the people on screen, and don't have nearly enough to contemplate once the curtain's gone down. Virginia will often intrigue you with its deep state conspiracies, get you feeling like you're in a deep state of mind with its dreams and visions, but ultimately, the game is so open-ended, it's narratively incontinent. If you've been enjoying the channel or this video ends up really doing it for you, please consider supporting the work. You can become a YouTube channel member, and you can become a patron at patreon.com/highfunctioningmedium. And if you're looking for ways to support the channel that don't cost you anything extra, feel free to use my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links that sends me a little chunk of the sale at no extra cost to you. Just know that any and all support is invaluable, even if it's simply watching and engaging with the videos themselves. Now, I also want to give a huge shout out to my lovely patrons: Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Shantiva, Hey Blondie, James Wyatt, Ianth Review, and Yaxo. You guys have given me such great encouragement and support, and it's just really helped me inch towards this being a full-time thing one day.